Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good following morning. This is AMA number, wait for it, 21. Today is, I've just been informed, August 13th, 2020. I am coming to you live today. First of all, we're going to have a very, very exciting guest who's a good friend, really a complete rock star in the Jewish world. Dava Schub, who was chief program officer at the JCC Manhattan, is now going to be the CEO of the JCC, the DC JCC. Very, very exciting to have her. That's in a few minutes. First of all, hi Benji, see who's watching. I am coming to you this week from the island of Kalymnos, the Greek island of Kalymnos. Maybe Seb will put up a little graphic of where that is. Anyway, very near the Turkish border. Last week I was in Kos. This is the next island. We were supposed to do island hopping from island to island, but we have come to this island, Kalymnos, and completely fallen in love with Kalymnos. So instead of going to all these different islands in the area, we have decided to stay here in Kalymnos. It's just sometimes you go to one of those places and you just feel, wait a minute, we don't need to leave. Why leave here? So it's a very special place. Not really that full of tourists. Hi Vicky, hi Benji. Not that many tourists. You don't really have an airport. You don't have an international airport. So you kind of have to make more of an effort to get here. This is historically the sponge diving island. So if you see sponges, the Greek sponges, which are sort of these very famous sponges that are the original sponge, I guess, which are these living sea creatures that they go and dive for. This was the original center, it still is the center of the sponge diving industry. So it's kind of it's cool in that sense. Everywhere you go, they have sponges and you can buy all these really huge sponges, I guess, at a good price, but it's a very interesting place. Everybody that I've run into, people are very friendly, but that's all across Greece. But everybody's from here. Like the island, you'd think that people move and come and open shops here and stuff, but it really seems like everybody here is from this island. And we were staying in an Airbnb for a while, which was really cool. It was actually like you actually had to walk along the beach to get to it. It was very strange. It's hard to explain. But you only have to walk along the beach and then up these steps, like something from a film. That was cool for a while, but then we decided to move. So now we're staying. There's a restaurant here, really cool restaurant called Prego, and the chef here was actually on Top Chef in Greece, and is sort of opened this restaurant here. So they have rooms attached. So we're staying with these rooms, but we're right. I don't know. You can see sort of behind me is still the island of Kalymnos, which is this island attached to Kalymnos. Very, very beautiful. And we're here. Today is Thursday. We are here until Sunday. Then Sunday we'll go back to Kos for a couple days. And then it will be back to Poland, back to Krakow. Be interesting going back. Travel is normal. Usually travel so much. Corona, been in Krakow for quite a while. So this is the first time really. One day went to Zakopane outside of Krakow, but besides that, this is the first trip abroad and the first real time spent out of Krakow. So it's been interesting. I managed to keep up, try to not work all the time, but keep up with work. Figured out a pretty good balance with that. But yeah, it's been beautiful. I have to say that I've been to Greece before a few times, but I've never been to never had an experience like this. I guess never really been here in the middle of the summer. But just the vibe. It reminds me, I don't know exactly how to describe it. I used to go, when I lived in Israel, and I lived on the kibbutz in the Negev, Yotvata, near Eilat. So we used to go very often to Sinai. And talking about Sinai, Dahab, and places like Nueva, back in the 90s, it was very laid back. Just everybody was all kind of, I think you didn't really have telephones and nobody, it was pre-cell phones, but there were no phones there. There was no real hotels. You just kind of stayed on the beach in these sort of tents almost, very, very chill. Didn't get up, just wear bathing suits, didn't have to really put a shirt on all day or anything. It reminds me a little bit of this sort of very laid back attitude. which is something kind of nice when you're used to living in the city, especially. But very, 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 very. It's a sound. It'll turn off in a second. Sorry about that. I found some corner of shade here. So sorry about that. Oh, Yezha, you stayed on a boat while traveling across these islands. Worth moving there. Absolutely. I have to say that I wrote it semi-jokingly on Facebook that that Kashin wants to look for a house here. But no, we were sitting and really thinking about, is this a place to retire? Is this a place to have like a summer place? It's really very, very cool, beautiful, beautiful. The nature here is unbelievable. It's also, I mentioned the sponge diving. It's also a rock climbing place. It's one of the most famous rock climbing places in the world. So you're sort of here, and then you see some of these people that are like these just super fit tourists, and you're like, okay, rock climber. So that's a big thing. They have like the rock climbing world championships here, and all the T-shirts that they're selling say like, I climbed Kalimnos. So that's the thing. Sponge diving and rock climbing are the two things. Hi, Saul. How are things in Seacliff? Seacliff, I feel like the name of where I am should be Seacliff. It's very Seacliffy. Jeffrey, Dahab and Nueva in the 80s were even better. Oh, don't rub it in. Jeffrey, you're always, the fact that you're older, not some good and some bad, but you're certainly rubbing it in, the fact that you went to Dahab and Nueva in the 80s. Well, I think you went there when they were still part of Israel, which is its own special world. But yeah, I went there. I think I stopped counting. I went to Dahab and Nueva. I went to Sinai. I think it was like 16 times or 18 times, and that was it. I hope you guys hear me okay. There's a bit of I think it's some air conditioning unit or something going on behind me, but I hope you guys can hear me. Anyway, can't really move, so we're stuck with that. So September coming up in the JCC. What people are asking, what's going to happen in September? We are looking at 3 different scenarios in terms of being open. I think I talked about this before, sort of things stay similar to now, things get better or things get worse, and hopefully we can keep Friday open and continue to open things up. Right now, the JCC is on complete break, so the office is still technically open. People are still answering emails, but Friday, the preschool is closed and the senior club is closed. So this is JCC is on a little 2-week. The building itself is on a little 2-week break, and then Friday will open the 3rd week. So 1 more week, and then Friday will reopen. They only have a 2-week break this year. Usually the preschool has a 1-month break, but Friday has a 2-week this year just because there was so much time off because of Corona. And we want to, parents are very eager to have the children getting their Jewish education as much as possible, and probably also a little bit of having some time. So that is that. What else going on in Poland? It feels strange not to be there with stuff going on. There's really a lot of issues. Poland's been in the news these last few days, New York Times and just all over the international news with the sort of this LGBT issues. The government during the election made certainly was very aggressive in pandering to the far right and to the super Catholic elements of the country by being very anti-LGBT, saying something to me which is really horrible, dehumanizing people, essentially saying that LGBT, it's not people, it's an ideology, and it's an ideology worse than the Nazis and worse than communism, which is a pretty ridiculous thing to say. In other words, how can you say that people that are just being themselves and living the lives that they're living are an ideology, and that ideology is a threat to the country? These to me are words that are just horrible, horrible words that the government, they were saying before the election. And the question was, as it always is in these elections, when candidates say things during the election, are they just sort of pandering, or is this really going to be what it's like after the election? And they didn't waste much time after the election. So there's a lot of really nasty stuff going on. There are protests. For the first time, the LGBT movement in Poland is really starting to get a little more empowered, and I would say a little more radical, and not just standing there and protesting quietly, but really sort of being more active. And that's, of course, itself somewhat divisive, with standing up to this threat by the government. Should they be taking these actions of sort of, there's a question of, they have these vans that drive around, which essentially say that Israel is, that the LGBT ideology are leading to pedophilia, and being taught in the schools is training pedophiles. So there was an attack on one of these vans, and now the police are very very aggressively prosecuting the people who sort of went after this van. I can tell you that if there was a van going through a neighborhood in Poland which was saying Jews are the enemy and Jews are an ideology, then I would be out there, as I think many of us would be from the Jewish community, and we wouldn't allow those vans to be broadcasting and spewing that hate. So from my point of view, I stand firmly with the LGBT community. We, the JCC in Krakow, stand firmly with the LGBT community, and we'll do whatever we can and whatever it takes to help make sure that they have freedom and good living conditions, and just what everybody else, what all the rest of us have in Poland. And I think that, especially as the Jewish community, that feel that we've been under such threat and have undergone such persecution, I think we have a special responsibility to stand with others when they're being persecuted. And no question about it now, the community that's being persecuted in Poland is the LGBT community. So I think we've been pretty active standing with the LGBT community for years and years. We are always marching. They used to have the parade in Krakow it's called For Equality. We always had Jews for Equality. First it was tolerance, and they said, wait a minute, tolerance is not really the right word here. We want equality. And we used to have march with a banner, a big rainbow banner that said Jews for tolerance, and then we changed the banner to Jews for Equality. And we've had rainbow umbrellas up in the courtyard of our JCC for the last couple of years. Now people are all starting around Poland to put rainbow flags on. So I'm starting encouraged to see that people realize that they should be standing with the LGBT community. It's just such a mystery to me of you sort of feel like these persecution, why are people racist, and why are they anti-Semitic, and why are they homophobic, and the rest of it. And it's very hard to understand how people can be just against an ideology. Why be so against, for example, gay marriage? Just don't get married yourself to somebody of the same sex. Well, how does that, hard to see how that infringes on anybody's rights, how that bothers anybody, how that really threatens anybody's worldview. And especially when people claim to be so religious and these things, and you're supposed to be living your life by the values of Jesus. It doesn't seem to me that Jesus would be persecuting LGBT people today if he were around. So, I don't want to tell anybody else how to live their life, but you gotta let people live. So I want our JCC to be a safe haven, to be really a place that not only is passively stands with communities as they're under threat, but more actively does so, and we're going to look into how we can do that, and we'll speak to different organizations about how we can be more of an ally and more of a partner and more of a supporter to the community, which we have in the past, but the need is much greater now. So with that, I am going to introduce a really wonderful person. Very lucky to have her as a guest. It's really cool timing because she's undergoing a interesting career move. Today, my guest is Dava Schub, Dava Schub, who is still for another 2 weeks, for another 18 days. I'm
unemployed right now.
He's unemployed. So if anybody wants to give Dava a quick job for 18 days, but Dava until has been the chief program officer at the JCC Manhattan, which is sort of one of really the premier JCCs on planet Earth, and is going to run to be the CEO of the JCC in Washington, D.C. Edlovich, is it right?
Edlovich, the EDC JCC.
EDC JCC.
You got it.
Welcome, Dava. Thank you for being my guest.
Nice to start my day with you, Jonathan. What island are you on?
I am on the island of Kalymnos. Have you been to?
It looks amazing.
Oh my God, it is just the craziest. I can't. I was saying earlier we were supposed to leave, and then we just were like, wait a minute, we don't want to go anywhere else. We just changed our plans and just like stuck around here for the last. So it'll be like 9 days on this island, not out of general laziness, but because this. So yeah, I want to get to your change. This is a huge change. We've talked about so many things and career and all this over the years as we've known each other, but So maybe just start with JCC Manhattan, because New Yorkers all know JCC Manhattan. It's such a massive cultural institution and such a really interesting model, this urban JC. Maybe tell me a little bit about the JCC, where you're still, until very recently, was working.
Sure. So I had the pleasure for 15 years of calling the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan my home, my playground. So much has happened in the time since the spot on 76th and Amsterdam Avenue, predating my arrival there, was an ExxonMobil gas station, and Upper West Siders and beyond had a dream of what Jewish life could and would look like if they built it a beautiful home. The idea that you create something meaningful and substantial, and in it anything is possible. And so they raised the money, they had the vision, they built the building, they hired incredible staff. And 15 years ago, I joined that team. Actually, the JCC there opened just moments after 9/11. The first nursery school class walked in sort of in the shadows of that experience. And
what was your first job, Dava, when you came there?
What
was your
my first job there? I was the director of annual giving. It was a job in fundraising. I spent 1 year in that job, and then Joy Levitt, who's now the executive director, left the job most closely resembling the one that I'm just vacating now. She became the executive director. I knocked on her door and said, that job that you just left, like, that's who I am and what I do, and what I'd been doing in other JCCs for a number of years, most recently in Stamford, Connecticut, prior to arriving at the JCC in Manhattan, in Norfolk, Virginia before that. And it's been an incredible journey. It's a place where like we never met a good idea we didn't like. Anything seems possible. And I'll say in the 15 years that I was there, we tried things sort of ordinary and extraordinary. And even looking in the rear view mirror, I can't think of one that flopped, whether it was, launching a disabilities film festival, imagining that Jewish day camp could be something extraordinary, and purchasing a 21-acre sort of field of dreams where that could become possible, launching a Center for Social Responsibility, so many things. And I just think because the people are there to think together, dream together, and to fund, support it, and to make those dreams come true, a lot has really happened that I've been so proud of.
Absolutely. No, it's a fantastic place. So I understand that I didn't, first of all, I didn't know that you started on the fundraising side. So you see yourself much more on the programming side as opposed to the fundraising side.
I see myself in the community building side. And as we talk about all the time, like we might offer 2,000 programs a season, but we're not in the program delivery business. We're in the community building business. And so whether your business card says development or marketing or chief program officer, the idea is that we're all tour guides on the journey. So I want to tour with you on this beautiful island you're on, but in Jewish life, we're all tour guides on the journey of the places we've been and where we're going. And it's a cool gig.
It's a cool gig indeed. So tell me about, because you're working with Joy Levitt, who is, I think, a singular figure in the Jewish world. For those of you who don't know, Joy Levitt is a rabbi and just an amazingly strong, decisive, Joy Levitt is a force of nature. And I know you must have a million. My favorite Joy Levitt story, who, as I said, she's a rabbi, and we were having lunch in Nismatin, around the corner from your JCC. And we were saying, and it was before Kasha had done her conversion, and she was doing a conservative conversion and with the rabbi. And Joy was like, "You feel Jewish?" Kasha's like, "Of course, yes, I have the Jewish background." And then you want to be part of the Jewish people? She's like, I'll make a phone call right now. We'll go 3 blocks away to the mikvah. I'll get you dunked after lunch in 20 minutes. And that was like, to me, that was like, bam, Joy Levitt. So what, I mean, just, it must have been unbelievable to work with Joy. That is a good Joy
Levitt story. And she is a force of nature, an incredible role model for me, and an incredible, I don't know, magic maker in Jewish life. And to your story about your wife and her joining the Jewish people, I think one of the secrets not on my resume is that I must have been, in my 15 years working with Joy, on at least half a dozen Beit Din, where I would go over to the Upper West Side mikveh with her. And really, it was an incredible gift as a non-rabbi, but as a Jewish communal leader, to be able to sit with someone, look into their eyes and say, what brings you on this journey? What are you looking for out of it? And in some ways, because I don't come to that seat through a halachic role, the questions I can ask and the ways in which I can listen and sort of hold that person figuratively on the journey was nothing I ever expected to do in my role as chief program officer. But those are moments that I will never forget.
Absolutely. No, I was really inspired by her, this idea of the article that she wrote or co-authored, of saying essentially that you should, when you marry somebody Jewish, you should then have to opt out. In other words, the marrying somebody Jewish should be, by a given. Why should we suppose that you're not inside? In other words, you're inside unless you've decided not to be. So in the end, we didn't take her up for the offer, and Kasha did conservative conversion, then she did Orthodox, just because that was the path that she was sort of on. But it always meant a lot to me from that Joy was just the way, this sort of seeing things with a certain clarity and being able to, although she's, being able to operate in a bureaucratic setting, but also cut through all the, cut through all the bullshit that so many of us have to deal with all the time. And it's interesting to be, I would assume that it's been fascinating to be around that and to sort of be able to learn from that.
It's certainly a good space from which I build my vision for approaching Jewish communal life, because not only the cutting through the bullshit part, but even that idea that the gateways to Jewish life, the tent doors, are wide open and welcoming. Like, why would we create barriers? We bemoan the fact that people are not engaged in Jewish life, and then there's that theory that you have to turn away someone 3 times who wants to convert to Judaism. What does that mean in terms of the doorways to the JCC and to any parts of Jewish life, to say, come on in, like, come the hell in, we want you here. We're going to make this work for you. We're going to make this meaningful for you. I don't think that's just about conversion. I think that's about that it's our work to create the access points and to create the experiences that are meaningful and useful to people where they're at.
And to have them be accessible. So much of the talk these days, we can say, oh, what, how forgetting about all the battles about who's Jewish, which are really probably among the most complicated battles, and the barrier to conversion, and and the Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, and all of these issues. But even once you're in the idea of the cost of being Jewish is something that we talk a lot about these days. What is the cost of day school education? And these are issues that that I think also that you guys are dealing with. I mean, I don't think there's no JCC in the world that has as many Jews living around it as yours does, right?
The number is somewhere close to 100, between 80 and 100,000 Jews on the Upper West Side, over 1 million in New York City. And so if anything isn't possible in that environment, I don't know where it is. Just the numbers are in our favor. And you're talking about day school and various things. The point is, there's no one way of being Jewish, of living Jewishly, of celebrating Jewishly. And, we're a community of communities. And so, of course, everyone is not only welcome. A colleague of mine says, like, we've created Jewish life with you in mind. To say you're all welcome is sort of passive. Like, we'll sit here and you can choose to come in or not come in, and we'll keep the door open. But when we opened the JCC in Harlem, where you and I had a chance to listen to great music there one night with our colleague and friend Smadar Bar Akiva, we kept on using the language of co-creating community with those who lived there and those who were already leading in that neighborhood. And I just think that's true. It was easier for that to be true in a place where something was being created from scratch. But I think in Jewish life and in communal life, that's always the optimal way to be doing it, to be looking at who the people are and what they want and need from their lives, and how Judaism can be a tool, a methodology, an opportunity to engage in that life in more meaningful, deep, thoughtful ways.
Absolutely. So talk a little. I'm interested about the challenges. You have so many Jews living there, and obviously Jews of all different, all different stripes and different flavors. How is it possible for one institution there to be able to sort of be there to sort of take a stand on certain issues. And you guys, in terms of social justice, are really, really on the cutting edge. And having Ruth Messenger there, and all that you do with Ruth, who's amazing. But in terms of doing that, yet being a place sort of for everybody, when not everybody, I think that the JCC Manhattan, say doesn't have a political stance, but to some degree there is a political stance attached to what you're generally doing, yet you want to be open for everybody. So is that a challenge? I mean, I just sort of want to get it. What are the challenges that JCC Manhattan found? I mean, Krakow, it's of course, with the post-Holocaust and where the Jews and this environment, but you're operating in such, your challenges are not completely different, because you could probably boil them down to having people engaged Jewishly and letting them through a Jewish framework lead productive lives and making the world, a better place for everybody. But what were the main challenges you think in terms of coming up with programming and just as an institution of sort of also having a voice, but not having that voice only be there for people that maybe agree with certain aspects of what you're trying to do there?
It's a great question. The first challenge that came to mind, then I'll go to the one you were asking about, is that when anything is possible, it becomes challenging to prioritize, because there are so many different kinds of people and so many incredible opportunities to serve them, that whether it's thinking about work around racial justice, or thinking about the opportunity to serve aging adults in a new and thoughtful way, whether it's the idea of taking young families on a seamless journey of Jewish life. There's just, I think actually the fact that anything is possible is the biggest challenge, because it's hard to then decide what resources to put where, and how to focus and create enough airspace for the things that are important to really thrive and survive. But going to the question that you asked, because also it's a sort of a more specific, nuanced, and important one, is can you be a place for everybody at one time? And I'm going to kind of hedge my bets and say yes and no.
While standing for something.
Yeah, so I think that's
Yeah.
And so you said the JCC is not a political organization, but it sort of is. I would say it's not, but it is a value. It is a values-based organization, and Joy was yelling at me for not changing my pronouns, and now that I'm in like this limbo land where I've had this beautiful goodbye, this goodbye event with folks there, and I haven't yet started. I'm not sure who's the we and who's the they, but let me practice and say they. They stand for something, and there was a beautiful two-story high quote by Elie Wiesel in our window many months ago that was saying that, like that you want to not stand on the side of the oppressor, that you need to be proactive and know where your line is, and I think to people that does sometimes read as political, but it's really not meant to. I think the idea that you cannot you cannot be exclusive here and say that all aren't welcome. You cannot discriminate. You cannot look at a person with a disability and imagine that they are less than or not capable. You cannot bring your racial bias into our space or into our community and not be held accountable for it. So as a values-based organization, if we can state and elevate our values, then I think as a leadership organization, we raise the bar for the 50,000 people that are walking in our doors on a given year. And that's huge. We're not a radical organization. I think if the JCC was a radical organization, we might stand stronger and firmer for something that some would say is very clear, but then you'd be alienating people. And we are a large tent, entry point, connected point, staying point in Jewish life. And so often the thing that we talk about is, where is the rest of the Jewish communal landscape? When is it a leadership moment, and when is it sort of following and knowing where there's consensus? I mean, years ago, actually, my first moment that I remember actually before I started working at the JC Manhattan. It was when I ran into Joy in Washington, D.C., when there was a rally against the genocide in Darfur. And the JC was part of this real Jewish communal project with American Jewish World Service and Ruth Messenger to take a stand against genocide. Certainly it's part of our own history because of the Shoah. And we packed buses and rolled into Washington. And maybe some would say, like, why is that front and center on the Jewish communal agenda? Maybe the Holocaust history makes it clearer. I think everything that we stand with or stand for, someone can ask the question, why is that our work and why does it matter? I think when you're clear about what your values are, it's pretty easy to articulate and stand behind that. Sometimes the part that's frustrating to me is when people try to equate things and say, if you're doing this and not that, you must care about this more than that. And why not the political prisoner in Israel? Why is this the sign in your window and that's not the sign in your window? Why are you participating in a rally for this when there's this issue on the Jewish communal agenda? I don't think it's a zero-sum game. There's lots of cracks in our world, and we need to create space to understand them, to respond to them, and we have the power to rally our community to make the world a more just place that strives for something better than where we're at right now. And that's the work of our JCC. So again, I would never use the word political. I wouldn't shy away from it, but I just don't think it's who we are. We learned years ago what was possible. We used to worry that as a nonprofit, there was a lot we weren't allowed to do. And actually what we learned in that research was we weren't allowed to stand behind a candidate running for elected office. There's so much more around issues that we are in fact allowed to engage in, but still we have to always be cautious. I think both JC Manhattan, this will be true for the EDC JCC, and I think for any communal organization with a broad intention to say, is this something we want to get behind? And what does this mean? And what's our authorization to take a stand here? But there's a lot that as a nonprofit, we can stand for.
I think where it gets difficult in the Jewish world, I mean, you can say, okay, we stand for tolerance, and if people are intolerant, then we'd like them to come away to our way of thinking. But we stand for equality and things that are sort of easier to, or not as controversial, maybe at least shouldn't be as controversial. But I think Israel is such a polarizing issue these days, which to me makes I find that very sad. Not forgetting about where anybody is in terms of Israel, but just the idea that you have a homeland after 2,000 years of exile, and that is not something that's at this point universally, celebrated. I mean, not that it should or shouldn't be is a separate issue, but the fact that it's not is I think that to me is sad. But Israel is a challenge, right? How do you do it? What films do you show in your film festival, right? If some virulently anti-Israel film, do you show that in your film festival? You say, oh, we're giving a voice, not giving a voice. But I think that's something in the Jewish world that is really particularly complicated, and especially when you're in a place like, for me, it's not that complicated because I don't get that pushback. I'm not in a place where there are people who are saying, wait a minute, Palestinian voices aren't being heard. That's not where the community in Krakow is at. So if I go and I show Middle Eastern Film Festival and I show 10 Israeli films, I'm not going to get, no one's protesting in front of the building. But in the United States, especially placing in the Upper West Side, it's a different world. I think Israel's a tough one. So how do you crack that nut?
What our stake in the ground on that one is that we're not going to shy away from the conversation, and we're not going to sort of stand by and allow a community to disengage because it's too hard. And so many years ago, I've lost track of time, maybe not many, 6, 7, 8 years ago, we created an incredible program forum. And the idea was really around this drive for civil discourse, to say there are many perspectives on Israel, and as around many issues, you talk to those you agree with, or you just stop talking about it. So whether it's the family Thanksgiving table, or in the seats at synagogue, or in the lines at the grocery store, people. That's one of the research was showing that was one of the list of topics that people just decided it was too hard. Let's not talk about it. And we said, we actually did a survey to say, what are the things that matter most to you? What do you want to spend time, effort, and energy on? And you would think it's our work to respond to those priorities. And in most cases, that was how we move forward. But one of the areas that was an anomaly was around Israel. People at the time were not looking for more of that. I think it was divisive. It was scary in some ways. It was maybe considered too personal. I think there was a generational divide of that's what my parents or my grandparents cared about because they knew a world without Israel. I, as a younger person, took for granted the establishment of the state of Israel. I missed the birthright boat demographically, but let's say you're talking to someone who's 30 right now. I always had access to a free trip to Israel. I took it for granted in many ways, and so we created a context where the many sides of a story could be heard, and it was always about excellence. And so it was the best people talking about this side or that side of an issue around Israel. But it wasn't just about them and their expertise, because you could put anybody up on stage for 45 minutes or 90 minutes and they could leave. But actually, we need to be able to be in community with each other once that person goes home and once the lights go back on, because we are going to continue to be in the grocery store lines with each other, in the seats at synagogue, in school parking lots with each other, whatever it might be. And so we would have those folks speak in dialogue. First, the way we introduced the program always was setting the stage for civil discourse and inviting people to listen to perspectives different than those they came in with, knowing that we are not trying to change their minds. We are not even trying to shift their thinking. We just want to open their minds to help them understand that people who have different perspectives around Israel can still very much care for, love, and connect to the state of Israel, to the idea of Israel. And after, let's say, 45 minutes of a 90-minute program, we would have the moderator turn to the audience, turn to the tables of people with a question and invite them to talk amongst themselves at the tables. And it was a high touch program to put together because every table had bottles of wine and lemonade with mint in it and some snacks, because we were trying to create the experience of being in community with each other. Being in rows of seats doesn't do that. We wanted to break bread together and drink wine and be in relationship to each other. And often the conversation really turned deeply and in a challenging way to the topics around Israel. Sometimes people talked a bit about Israel, drank a little bit of wine, and came back to the part about Israel. And still, that was meaningful, because when they left the room and they were in the stairwells and in our lobby and out on Amsterdam Avenue, the conversations continued, which gave us great hope that we were changing the dialogue and creating a space where Israel could be centered in a space of communal conversation that didn't have to only be from this perspective or that perspective. So I guess I would just say the stake we put in the ground was that it mattered to us, that our JCC was anchored in a commitment to Israel, but the commitment didn't have to look only one way, and that if we showed a film that was about the lives of the Arab citizens of Israel, or we brought in a dance performance or theater that struggled with some of the ways in which Israel engages, that was not by its nature anti-Zionist or anti-Israel, that we always were anchored with deep love and commitment and connection to Israel, and that was an expansive space, not a restricted place.
I think as an institution, which you guys do a good job of, once you show the community that you care about it a certain way, and you're not trying to change minds, and you have buy-in from the community and trust from the community, then you can do things that would be in some ways very difficult to do. just because you're
You
always
also mentioned the
Right.
protest. I guess I will also add, at some moments we knew we were succeeding when each side had different days they were protesting. So
Exactly.
it was
No, of course.
some said we were too left, some said we were too right, and we thought, okay, that means we're creating space.
You don't want only one side, but you certainly don't want no one protesting. You have to have somebody. So in a minute, I want to get soon to DC and the new position, and that's very, very exciting. And but I want to talk a little bit about JCC Harlem before that. So it's which is a fantastic institution, really just very cool, and this idea of kind of setting up this sort of offshoot. So maybe talk a little bit about the project of JCC Harlem.
Oh, it's cool. It is cool. So 3-ish years ago, UJA Federation came to us and said, there is an emerging Jewish community in Harlem, and we would love the JCC to take their approach to engaging in community and building Jewish life, and open a storefront up there. And actually, I will say it was one of the few times, maybe the only time in my 15 years there that I or we said no. And you can tell how emphatic that no was, because 3 years later, it's one of the things I'm most proud that we ultimately jumped in and said yes to. We took over the lease to a very cool space on West 118th Street between Manhattan Avenue and Frederick Douglass Boulevard. And as a storefront that was sort of a bricks and mortar space in a neighborhood that no longer had a Jewish address, and certainly a Jewish address that was open to all people. And we did a lot of listening. We did a lot of surveying. We did a lot of focus grouping. I always say a lot of coffee was consumed in the building of that JCC, because Meg Sullivan, myself, Joy Levitt, and others, just countless communal leaders and folks who lived there, both in the Jewish community and well beyond it. And I always asked someone, what does it mean for us to be a good neighbor up here? What worries you about us moving into the neighborhood? What excites you? What's the opportunity to play and work together? And people spoke honestly about those and those worries. And we really do. But that's where I mentioned before, there's really this idea of co-creating community with the people who live someplace. And mentioning those surveys, the survey respondents that came back in fancy grid forms and gave us pie charts, and it showed people who are really hungry for Jewish life, that didn't look that different than the Jewish life we were living on the Upper West Side. But when we took time to reflect those survey results back to people, as we did communal gatherings, town halls, and things of the sort, at every one of those gatherings, at least one person, and almost always they would wait until the gathering broke up and people were leaving, and they would approach me, or they would approach Meg or Joy or somebody at a leadership space in the room, and they would say, I know you heard people saying they want synagogue, they want Jewish education, they want certain things. The people who are responding already have Jewish life. Those are the people who either go to the Upper West Side for a synagogue or go to the synagogue closest to where the JCC is opening a space. But I have a Caribbean partner, or I adopted a child who's African American, or I'm a single parent, or here's my own background that makes me struggle with Jewish life and makes me love Jewish life, but made me choose to live in Harlem in spite of the fact that there's no sort of organized Jewish life up there when I got there. And if you don't create this community with me in mind specifically, you're gonna lose me also. So we just listened a lot and learned, and wanted everything from our marketing materials to the ways in which we imagined program, to do it with those people in mind. And those people are not any one kind of person. I'm plugging my phone in while talking to you. It's all kinds, but it's just a reminder that that, you know, we need to listen and respond and fill a gap. And we did that in that space with outdoor Shabbat dinners, with strung lights and potluck, and we did that through all kinds of music and so.
Yeah, sorry, David, but also not only for the Jewish community though, but I mean, maybe people, I don't know, people watching or who will watch this really understand that Harlem was a very Jewish place for a long time. And then, you know, as neighborhoods change, it became, of course, the symbol of really, you know, the most known Black neighborhood in the world, I think, synonymous with African-American culture. And lately, let's say really in the last 25 years, it's undergone another real demographic change and gentrification. And I guess really the question that I'm also interested in is that, I mean, obviously these are just things that you discussed, but how, you know, not only are you serving normal, you know, one of these, wherever you open a JCC, what is the community there? How are we serving them? Do we need to do this? You know, how is this helping them lead whatever lives? But here you're also talking about, are you speeding up a process of gentrification that's sort of pushing out African Americans and bringing in essentially your wealthier Jewish constituency to Harlem, which is the symbol of you know, one of the main symbols and an important African American neighborhood for the last 100 years. So how about those discussions?
Those have been those have anchored so many of our conversations. And I used to say, we're not the cause of gentrification, we're a symptom of it. And as we continued in our work there, not only did some people shift me to push my thinking and my language, but it became less true. We also became part of the landscape of gentrification, because someone would walk into the JCC and say, "Oh, I can see raising my family in this neighborhood. Oh, there is Jewish life." And with each new person who moved there, who chose to live there, I wouldn't say because of the JCC, but I think that we were part of we are part of the gentrification of that neighborhood, and so it puts more responsibility on us. So I don't think the question is, are we there for the Jewish community, or are we there for the broader community? I think that absolutely there is a unique and specific purpose. The JCC is anchored in its J, but going back to the broader JCC conversation of being anchored in our values, that means being in relationship to our neighbors. That means asking the question of, what does it mean for us, the JCC, and us, the Jewish community, to live in relationship to those whose neighborhood this was before we ever got there, to figure out how we can work together, how we don't swoop in with solutions, because we're the new guy in the neighborhood, and acknowledging that we are part of the challenge obligates us to be part of the work moving forward too, but not to be so centered in ourselves to think that we're smarter and clearer, and that we by ourselves we know the solutions. So listening and partnering has been really important, and figuring out our roles in those partnerships. Sometimes it's to offer our space. Sometimes it's to lend our voice to the conversation, and sometimes it's just to listen. But it's always not to miss the impact that we have by being up there.
Very complicated, these issues of gentrification, especially as a native New Yorker. You know, you see just neighborhood by neighborhood how much the city has changed from the time that I was living there, that I grew up in the 70s and 80s there. It's just you know, essentially, yeah, gentrification I always found to be such a fascinating idea, because essentially if you go into any neighborhood and you open something wonderful in that neighborhood, by definition, you'll attract people, and maybe people from the outside. So you could do even something with not even the intention of doing something like that, but just by definition of, you know, by having brought in new services to a neighborhood, you are making that neighborhood in some sense more attractive and more livable, which has the potential of bringing in people from the outside. And it seems like it's almost inevitable as long as it's done mindfully and done with an idea of not just barging in and kicking people out and doing it, but done thoughtfully and with an idea of putting down roots and caring about the people that might be displaced. Then I guess that's what there is to hope for. But it's just natural that people are going to move to some degree. It's not done in this horrible exploitative way, which is not the way that you guys did it. So I want to get to your new position, September 1. So
September
first,
1, it's around the corner.
A question for Agnieszka Gish, who you know, who was had a fellowship at JC Manhattan. And Agnieszka writes, Dava, congratulations on your new job. I'm really interested in your perspective of becoming an executive director of a JCC during these difficult times of the pandemic. Can you maybe share some of your feelings and thoughts about this transition? And what are some of the things you find important to focus on in the first few months? Agnieszka obviously sees herself she's part of the hiring committee there and is throwing another one at you.
Well, you can let her know that if she wants to do an internship in DC, we'll take her. I loved working with her in Manhattan. And I think her story is fascinating. At some point, you or she can share that, or you can interview her on one of these Facebook Live groups.
She was, she did, I did. I have already.
I missed it. Sorry, I'll go back into the archives and watch that one. Thank you for the question and for the good wishes. So it is a time like no other. And I guess I want to separate the two parts of the question. I am thrilled to be going and leading a JCC that is strong on the journey from strength to strength. I think that I follow in the footsteps of great leaders, Arna, and then Carol Zawatsky most recently.
Yeah, I know Carol from her days back in San Francisco. We have a date to talk coming up soon, and I walk into a place that they, with the board and staff leadership, have imagined and built. They did a $20 million renovation a couple of years ago. I walked in during COVID for a masked visit with the then board president, and I've never been in a JCC that was empty, because that's part of our magic, is that there's always hustle and bustle there, but this place was empty and smelled like a new car, and it was like longing to come to life. But then, like all of our JCCs, or many of them, we're finding new ways to innovate and connect and to reach people outside of our four walls, and we're learning so much. I would never describe this period of COVID as one with a silver lining, because when this many people have died and become ill and lost jobs and just had their lives upended, that there's no silver lining there. But there's so much to be learned and so much to be thoughtful about. And I keep thinking, and my early conversations when I start with people will be about, what do we strive, what do we dream to become on the other side of COVID, which, as an optimist, you might know that about me. I want to say it's a year away. I don't think I know COVID's not going away, but I think with a vaccine and with therapeutics, let's say a year from now, I think our ability to return to engaging in some more normal ways will be there for us to re-enter into. So as we think about how we want to come out on the other side, then the fun part of this next year will be about building the bridge very intentionally from where we are now to where we want to come out, to where we want to become. Because if we're just thinking about surviving and not thriving, you lose the purpose, and surviving is exhausting. Thriving and becoming is an opportunity. One of my colleagues was hearing my description of that and talking about it as the chrysalis and the butterfly, as opposed to the bridge. I think either metaphor works, but the idea is actually the cocoon that the butterfly, the caterpillar is in before it becomes a butterfly, actually has like nourishing material in it, and part of why the butterfly can emerge beautifully and fly afterwards is because of how it was nourished while it was in there. And so I think about my first year in this new role as the CEO of the EDC JCC as
working with the board and staff leadership to create the chrysalis and to think about the butterfly. And there seems to be so much pride and confidence in all this community has been for the past decade or more, and all that it has the potential to become. And I'm so grateful to be entrusted with that leadership seat. People ask me sort of, what's the vision you come in with? And I had to really pause and remind myself of my roots in community organizing and community building, and knowing that this listening tour isn't because I come in without a vision, but because my vision is to understand deeply this community, its needs, its strengths, its potential, and develop with them the roadmap. What are the partnerships we can lean into? Who are the people we can learn from and grow with? And what are the gaps? Because in a nonprofit landscape, in a Jewish community landscape, there's always, resources are always precious. And so why create things that are redundant or duplicative when we have a unique added value in the world, and there are areas that need us in particular. And in this COVID moment, as a sample size of 1 or 2, if you include my daughter, the needs people have in this moment are different. Kids are going to be home Zoom schooling for a period of time ahead. They're going to be missing many of the social experiences that they relied on the JCC and school and other aspects of their lives for. And so I don't have all the answers, but I do know the questions we'll ask will lead us to different places in this moment. And while we're trying new things, and we have the ability just to experiment and try things without them becoming anchors that are things we'll be doing forevermore. They don't have to become things etched in stone. But if everything we do with a heart and a head towards learning about our community, about our own strengths, and about what we're we're thriving to become, we'll come out stronger on the other side, or we'll come out somewhere different, meaningfully on the other side.
I'll tell you what, they're lucky to have you, Dava. They are lucky to have you, and you're so inspiring. Really, really are. There are two important questions. One, for a while we've been talking about a job swap, that we would go and spend a month or two. Everybody thinks we're joking, but I think we understand.
You're telling my secret.
That we're not say about our secret swap, but I think we'll do it, and it will become a thing in the world. So I need to understand if once you get everything settled past Corona, the lay of the land and everything, are we still on for the job swap?
We are totally on. So just share the backstory on this. Jonathan and I and our colleague Smadar Bar Akiva were up at a restaurant adjacent to JCC Harlem, I think probably a year and a half ago, and one glass of wine in. I shared my dream to take my daughter and travel the world and experience new cultures and new Jewish communities, and to continue my journey of learning. And I thought that one of the ways of doing that was to swap seats with other inspired people in Jewish communal leadership seats. And I thought Jonathan would be an excellent person to do that with. Jonathan's story is fascinating. Those of you who are in Krakow or already know him have heard it already. Those of you who don't, message me later and I'll share it with you, or I'll interview him later and he can tell you his story. But as a boy from Forest Hills, Queens, who went from Israel to Krakow and opened that JCC there, I thought that I could bring a lot of what I had learned anchored in Jewish New York to that community, and he could bring so much of what he had learned in creating Jewish life in an emerging community. And we could sit in each other's seats and do something very, very cool. And yes, the idea was not only that it would be amazing for each of us, and hopefully for these two communities in particular, but that maybe there'd be something that would come out of that. And Smadar, who is the incredible leader of JCC Global, said, "I'm in. However, I can help and support the two of you in sort of piloting this idea of an executive director seat swap. I think we can then make something happen in meaningful ways with other countries and other leaders too." So the answer, Jonathan, is yes, I'm still in.
Yeah.
Let me get my feet on the ground first. Let's talk by next summer.
It's a deal. And thank you. No, I think it's a great idea. And I think it can be beyond that, why not? I feel like CEOs of corporations, and I think it's just a good thing to really put yourself in somebody else's shoes and to actually immerse yourself, but to take it seriously, not, to actually, I'm not saying you would have no contact or not let any decisions be made, but I think that you take it really seriously and actually trust the person to be there. And obviously you're going into a situation where it's not a one-man show, like you're going to run the family business by yourself and you have no idea. There are people around you. So I feel like the staff would keep me from burning the place down. So.
Also, like starting in a new job, I think this swap idea is a moment to take a personal inventory and say, what are my strengths? Because I'm not going there to run the JCC in Krakow. That's your gig. Even if I'm there for a month, I'm going there to uniquely bring my gifts, my skills, my strengths, and my story to the people who anchor that place long after I leave. And the same would be true of you coming in. And so I think that we're all always running and busy and doing. And I think it serves both the time that we are in a new seat, and when we return to our existing seat, it serves us well to take that inventory of what are my unique assets and strengths, because hopefully in the day-to-day work, we tap into them even unconsciously, but sometimes we're running so fast, we don't even bring our most obvious strengths to our day-to-day work. And by sort of jarring ourselves out of our own day-to-day, I think we bring that back in a more intentional way.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. So we're still on. I'm happy to hear it. And number two, was the most difficult part of leaving, was it Benna? Was it school? Leaving Hunter? And with distance schooling, can you keep her there for, maybe she'll be able to just stay. If Corona, God forbid, Corona continues, then David can stay enrolled at Hunter.
I feel like you're like Barbara Walters. By the end of the interview, you always make someone cry. Barbara, not you. I haven't done it. Benna is, for those of you who don't know, my 9-year-old daughter and my partner in life. She is an incredible human being, and she has just jumped in with me. This is something that she never asked for. She loves New York and loved her life that we had created there. She had and has incredible friends. And as a 9-year-old, the idea of leaving and going someplace else is, it's a lot for an adult, but it's certainly a lot for a child. And she looked in my eyes when I got the job offer and said, "Mom, if it makes you happy, I'm in." And I said, it's my job and desire as her mom for us to be happy, that I was making this decision with us very much in mind, and thinking of all the ways that we go towards joy together and find new opportunities. And I also think it's part of my responsibility as her parent to teach her that it's good to take risks, that it's good to stretch yourself, that it's good to push yourself outside of your comfort zone and try new things. I think it's a way that she sees a different side of me. And yes, leaving, it was hard, and leaving and not being able to hug people we loved goodbye, from the doorman who's known her as long as I have, to friends from school that we did one socially distant play date with, to see before we left. But we didn't get a chance to say proper goodbyes. The JCC did a beautiful Zoom goodbye for me with, I think I saw a count of 108 people there, and it was just, it blew me away. It was the most amazing. I had Naomi Les singing Tfilat HaDerech to me to wish me a safe journey, and I nuzzled Benna under my arm during that, because she's been a part of my JCC journey every step of the way. There's sort of no light between my journey and hers. She's a unique human being, and I'm lucky to be in this with her. And it's not one journey, it's two, although we travel together. So it started for her in New York City, and it's taken her to DC. But she's I hate to even say a good sport, but she's been incredibly open. And yes, it was hard. The last night we were in our apartment, we ended up sleeping on two pillows on an empty floor with no bed, and she just cried her heart out and said, "This isn't an apartment, Mom. This is a home. This is the only place I've ever been raised." And the hashtags are on the wall of every inch she grew along the way, and those you can take with you in some ways, but it's hard to leave a piece of that behind. So I will miss New York City. She will miss New York City. The people, the places, the things that we've done there, and we're gonna have new adventures ahead.
Without question, you've got to be the coolest mom ever. No question about it.
I have a very cool mom, and I strive to be a good mom.
I want to meet your mom.
She would love to meet you.
I want to meet you.
She would love to meet you.
David, thank you so much. As always, it's completely inspiring. Best of luck with this.
Go back to the beach. I can't believe you left the beach to talk to me. That is kind of crazy.
The head of my board was like, Jonathan, work-life balance. I really think you not do. Take a Thursday. Don't do. I was like, no, me. I'm so OCD that if I'm doing something, the idea of skipping a week is like physically painful to me. But no, this is great. I can't be on the beach all the time.
I feel like one thing you and I both know, because it brought us together, is this idea that we are part of a global Jewish family that is so expansive and on every continent. And actually, one of the things we can lean into during this moment that we're all more isolated physically is that it's easy to be in relationship to each other on a Zoom call, and so I hope to find ways to connect with you and other folks throughout the world during this time.
Inshallah. Be well, David. Thank you.
Enjoy the beach. Talk to you soon.
I'll talk to you.
I promise. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.